Hi folks, and welcome to the Epochs of the Lotus Eaters, episode 60, Alfred the Great. Bo and I are going to be talking about England's first proper king, I think we can say, and I've been looking forward to this one for quite some time, and I hope you have as well, because I've got a lot to say about it.
Yeah. No, great. I suppose one super quick thing to say is who's England's first king? It's a messy question. There's not a proper answer.
Aethelstan, really.
Who was Alfred's grandson.
He was, yeah. But Alfred, spiritually, England's first king.
Other people, I've heard someone make the argument it was Offa, who predates Alfred by a while.
We don't accept Mercians in this house. In this house, Alfred's the real king of England, and that's enough.
Well, so just to say that Alfred is fully in the light of history. There's nothing mythical about him. His dates are 848 to 899. Mm-hmm. So the 9th century.
The late 9th century.
Yeah. So he's sort of roughly contemporaneous with Charlemagne, tiny bit older. But yeah, so do you want to just kick off, or where particularly would you like to begin?
I mean, things aren't going great in England.
Well, so Alfred's story is mixed up with that of the Danes, of the Vikings. That's his whole thing, really. So maybe just a little bit of a background on that.
Yeah,
so by the late 9th century, it's already down the road, hundreds of years down the road of the Norsemen invading our island.
So it was in 793, was it, that Lindisfarne was burned?
Lindisfarne, yeah, right. So I can't remember the date off the top of my head, but that sounds about right.
I'm pretty sure it's 792, 793, something like that, where the Christian monks are just off on an island on the edge of Britain, which, as far as they were concerned, was the edge of the world. I mean, they didn't think that anything was going to come from the east that just sail across the sea and then murder them all and steal all their stuff. And so they're just having a nice jolly day one day, and a bunch of pagan Vikings turn up and kill them and take their stuff and think, oh, well, what a lucky day we've had. It's like, yeah, okay, that was nice. And that began the Viking era with the ravages of England. And then it all goes downhill from there. All of the other English kingdoms start falling one by one because for some reason they were like, I'm not going to cooperate. And eventually it's Wessex that's standing alone.
Right, yeah. I mean, so the Lindisfarne episode, historians like to say, this is the beginning. Literally on that day.
It's not actually the beginning.
Right, yeah.
It's the beginning for the English. Yeah.
And that's one of the first massive raids where both sides realise, the Danes realise, oh, there's just this thing over there that's for easy plunder.
Vulnerable.
And the English realise, oh, they can come up, we're sitting ducks.
Yeah.
Both sides sort of realise. But in fact, Lindisfarne was raided loads of times. Like, it was raided 3 times in 3 years, I think, at one point, or 3 times in relatively quick succession.
Right.
But the Danes, the Vikings, actually, over the next few hundred years, invaded all around the place. Ireland got it pretty bad.
Yep, so did Scotland.
Well, yeah. There's one particular place in Ireland, I can't remember where it was, but it was like raided 14 times in a generation. They just kept coming back to it. Oh, yeah. Sometimes like burglars realise a particular house is an easy target, so they just keep going back to it.
I mean, Dublin was founded by Vikings. So you've got loads of settlements that the Vikings start colonising the British Isles because they're like, well, it's easy target and fertile land, so why not? Yeah.
And they start by sort of invading a lot of the Scottish Isles and then parts of Scotland, not the Highlands so much. And it's sort of like this sort of encroaching danger, this sort of implacable enemy that was just slowly rolling further and further south.
Yeah, and because for them it's brilliant. Like this weak kingdoms, lots of small weak kingdoms that are wealthy and they are populous. So you've got lots of money, slaves, and land that's just there for the taking, and very little solid, stiff resistance. And it's actually kind of annoying when you read the history, just how easily all these places just started falling. It's just like, right, okay, and that's that done, and that's that done, and then Northumbria's gone, and then Mercia's gone. So Mercia was the big, strong English kingdom. How did that happen? Well, that's gone. East Anglia's gone. Kent's gone. It's like there's nothing left. It's like it's just Wessex now because it was the furthest away from the Vikings. It's like, okay, good luck, Alfred. You're on your own, mate.
Yeah. So in the 9th century, our island was known to be basically rich.
Oh, yeah.
There's plenty of gold coin there. Good arable land if you did want to try and stay and settle.
And lots of them did.
Did. By the 9th century, certainly. Yeah. No, absolutely.
Half of the country is carved up into what's called the Dane Law, where the Danish just settled. It's colonised us.
So I guess just super quick, because we want to talk about Alfred the Great, but just to say then, So the Romans left in 410. Literally, they began leaving before 410, but in the year 410, Honorius sends a letter saying,
"Good luck.
Look after yourselves." Basically, we need all the legions back to defend Italy. So sort of 410, by sort of 400, 402, it was already, the writing was absolutely on the wall. But by 410, it's literally it's over. So then we get sort of semi-mythical people like Hengist and Horsa come over, Angles and Saxons and Jutes come over and displace quite often, maybe it's up for debate how much, but sort of genocidally replace the Britons.
We'll have to do a bit of a deeper dive into
this is sort of super
there's
shallow
a lot
stuff
to talk about here.
But by the 9th century, what's left of the Britons in sort of the southwest and parts of Wales and things are more or less on the side of the Angles and the Saxons against the Danes.
Well, it's better than the Danes.
Because at least to begin with, the Danes are heathens. They're specifically not Christian. And everyone else in Britain is Christian.
Yeah, because just a quick thing on that. Like, the Irish converted to Christianity in, like, the 2nd century or something, independently of the Roman Empire. They just were like, oh, that's a good idea. We'll do that. And the native British became Christian because of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire ruled here for 400 years. So they were totally domesticated, is I think the best way to put it, which is the reason that they invited the Saxons over anyway to fight the invading Scotti who had gone from Ireland up to, and the Picts down from Scotland. And so, because they just weren't capable of defending themselves. And then the English came over, or the Anglo-Saxons came over, settled, became domesticated as well, became Christians. And so, as you say, by this time, the entire island is Christian. And Alfred is, I mean, like, the Christianity of Alfred is effervescent in his writing. Like, everything he does, he's a Christian zealot, frankly. You know, there's no getting around it. But they're deeply, deeply Christian.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, by this point, we'll put a map up of what the island looks like during the age of Alfred. But before that, you've got sort of a heptarchy, or the rule of 7 kingdoms. Yeah. Again, maybe a little bit what George R.R. Martin's 7 Kings of Westeros are based upon.
Obviously.
But by Alfred's time, that's a bit old hat. Sort of the Northumbrians, the Kingdom of Northumbria had been in sort of the most powerful one for a while. And then Mercia. So when Alfred's young, or the first part of his reign, Mercia are really the most powerful kingdom. And it's most of the Midlands, in fact, more than what we call the Midlands. In fact, right on its southern border is London. At one point, London is part of the Mercian kingdom, not Wessex. And Wessex is very broadly everything south of the Thames, all the way out to the West Country. Yep. So just, you know, in a shallow sense, that's the world that we're looking at. And the Danes, as they're sort of collectively called, are all sorts of different Viking peoples from Scandinavia. Yeah. And yeah, they've hundreds of years again before this, they control. Well, they control London for most of this. Yep. But they certainly controlled the Danelaw, which is with York as their capital, and the Kingdom of Mercia was like their. I can't think of the correct word, but it was their bitch. They did what they were told.
Vassal?
That's the much better word.
Proper word
their
for
vassal.
It. Yeah.
And so the kings of Mercia are really actually just puppets for the Danes. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, we'll kick off there. One point I would say is, just before we start, is the historiography of it, just to mention that real quick. Some people like that. We've got the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which actually in Alfred's reign explodes and becomes much bigger and better, but it already existed before him. And so we've got bits and bobs in that. We've also got the accounts of Asa, and a chronicler called Asa, who was the Bishop of Sherborne in the end. I'm going to quote a lot from Winston Churchill's History of the English-Speaking People for a change, but because particularly this bit, Churchill on Alfred the Great, I think is a masterful bit of writing. The muses were upon him when he wrote this bit. Right, I think it's particularly sort of eloquent or poetic or whatever. A few lines in there are particularly great, I think. And
just to add to that, I've got this open because we actually have quite a lot of writing by Alfred the Great himself. A selection of his poems, and also his sort of a sort of philosophy of government. We've got his will, we've got his charters, we've got actually quite a lot on Alfred. So as Anglo-Saxon kings go, he's probably the best documented.
Yeah, well, Asa, his account is quite full, really. It's all sorts of...
I've never actually read it.
Yeah. Well, Churchill just quotes from it a fair bit. In fact, he said this: "The story of Alfred is made known to us in some detail in the pages of Asa, a monk of St. David's who became Bishop of Sherborne." Sherborne in the very, very early Middle Ages or late antiquity was sort of important. It was a quite good public school there to this day. But there's places like Winchester is the capital, not London. Yeah. Like Winchelsea or Sandwich are big ports, not Portsmouth or Plymouth. Yeah. So things are all different. In fact, I think it's funny, just English place names in general can be quite funny because they're sort of, if you know what they're like and they're really normal and then they get mentioned in sort of a grand historic context, like Reading or Aldershot, for example,
Chippenham,
come up.
Yeah. Like it's like, the city of Chippenham was sieged by the Vikings. It's like, Chippenham.
Yeah.
That's just down the road. Like
a great Viking horde assembles at Reading.
Yeah. It's really funny.
It's just odd. Right, so... Alfred was actually the second son. His father, Athelwulf. Is it Athelwulf?
I think it is.
Let's just check that. I think it's Athelwulf. Yeah, Athelwulf was his father. And the first son was an Ethelred. Not Ethelred the Unready. That's a couple 100 years later or 100 bit later. But the name Ethelred is really, really common. Yeah, well, lots of these names, Ethelbert, Egbert, Egbert.
Very much the Carthaginian problem with Anglo-Saxon names. You have a small pool of very similar sounding names. And these are passed down from father to son and grandfathers. And so you get people in the same line who've got the same name coming up repeatedly. It's insufferable to try and pass. But it's just the way the ancient world worked.
Yeah. I mean, maybe even when in future generations they'll look back on our times. It's like, why are there so many people called Dave and Chris?
Mohammed.
Get some more names. Yeah. Or Mo. Yeah. Anyway, so one of the big things, just to mention, before we get really stuck into details, just the general political thing. So Mercia itself, although it was the most powerful kingdom in the generation before Alfred and in his younger days, it had falling out with the church. So the sees of Canterbury and York were sort of the big ones, even back then. Churchill says that, the kingdom of the overlordship of Mercia, overlordship of all the other kingdoms in Britain, they'd made a serious mistake by quarrelling with the See of Canterbury. Quote, when in 825 the Mercian army invading Wessex was overthrown by Alfred's grandfather, King Egbert, at Ellendon near Swindon. And
typical place for great battles, Swindon.
And so, sort of the mantle of the most powerful kingdom does sort of pass to Wessex. And again, we're told that, quote, Wessex was strategically strong, with sharp ridges facing north, and none of those long, slow rivers up which the Danes used to steer their longships into the heart of Mercia.
That's a great point. Geographically, it's just not very favourable for seaborne invasion.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's the Thames that cuts deep into the heart of southern England. But if you don't include that, or if that's defended well enough, then it's a good point. A lot of the Midlands, like the Humber or whatever, there's just loads of waterways you can sail straight up. So, that's an interesting point. Again, Church says, the Danes had occupied London, not then the English capital, but a town in the Kingdom of Mercia, on the very southern tip of Mercia. And there the Viking army had fortified itself at Reading. So again, I think it's funny.
It's hilarious.
Those sorts of things.
But I mean, it's hilarious to hear the Midlands are invading, the Southwest. It's like, really? Are you?
Yeah.
But this is what used to happen.
So one thing I'd like to say is to jump ahead a little bit and sort of just give a very, very quick overview of sort of the end of the Viking Age, just so we can put all this more in context. So where we've given some impression of how it's gone up to this point, just to say that ultimately Canute in like the 1020s, is it? Canute
it is,
takes over all of He's a Viking king of England, absolutely, completely 100%.
He's very much an Anglophile as well.
Oh, yes, that's true. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, he's a Christian. That was everything else. But he's a Christian by that point. He goes on pilgrimage to Rome.
Yeah.
He's a full Christian.
But he's not any kind of, he's not a despot. He's not a like revolutionary despot or something. He governs sensibly. And so the English are like, okay, well, he's okay. And he becomes like actually quite a well-accepted king of England.
Yeah.
Weirdly.
Yeah.
Part of the North Sea Empire. It's called.
Plus, his predecessor was very unpopular.
Was
the Unready. His father, Sweyn Forkbeard, was his immediate predecessor. But before that, was the long broken reign of
Ethelred the Unready.
The Unready, yeah.
So the irony, it's a joke. Ethelred means elf counsel, which means wise counsel, and unready means poorly counselled. Wise counsel or poorly counselled. It's because he made lots of bad mistakes, like trying to pay off the Vikings. But anyway.
And some of his counsellors were sort of evil.
Yeah.
That was definitely true.
Yeah. We'll have to do a bigger episode on this at some point.
Okay, so once Athelwulf, Alfred's father, passes away, it then passes to his older brother, the crown of Wessex, then passes to his older brother, and Ethelred. And we're told that Ethelred was much more interested in, quote, faith and prayer, I'm quoting from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle there, whereas Alfred, although it says he's pious, certainly pious, and you say a lot of his writings...
it's very clear that he's a pious man.
But he puts more emphasis on, quote, policy and arms. So, just a bit more of a realist, I think it's fair to say.
Well, let's quickly go back to what his father was doing, right? So you've got Egbert beating Mercia in 825. The Vikings are invading during this period of time. So what are the Mercians doing invading an Anglo-Saxon kingdom when they should be invading north, defeating the Vikings? What are you doing? You can see the sort of political confusion in the land at the time. And so it really makes you wonder, what the impetus for this sort of thing was. So literally your northern vassals have been conquered by these foreign invaders. You're like, yes, I'm going to try and take Mercia. Okay, why? Yeah. What a waste of manpower. I mean, as I say, you're overthrown, which means great defeat in some way. Those men couldn't have been used to fight the Vikings. That's probably leads to you taking further losses to the Vikings as things go down. The pagans, and remember, like, it's okay to be racist to the Vikings because they're pagan, right? Like, they're not Christian. And so everyone hates them on that basis. It's ideological. And so you're like, so I'm going to invade that Christian kingdom to the south. It's like, why? What are you doing? It's so who knows? I don't know what the answer to that is. But
I think it's that in the pre-modern times, until quite recently, you just try and expand. It was just a no-brainer that you try and expand your power in any and all directions. And sort of playing a 4D chess thing plays into it a lot less.
Maybe if I gain control of Wessex as well as Mercia, then I can defeat the Vikings.
Exactly. It's like the Danes have been quieted for like 3 years. This is my window to try and invade my enemy at home. Yeah, it's actually a window to lose like the majority of your army now. Good job. But it's all very easy to say in hindsight, like Justinian, why did you reinvade the West? You should have shored up the East. Well, at the time, it's easy to say in hindsight, isn't it? But absolutely. So Alfred's grandfather and Egbert
another thing. I love the name Egbert. Like that's King Egbert to you, actually. It's not just Egbert, it's King Egbert of Wessex, thank you. And he's the victor over Mercia in 825. Okay, Egbert. It's such a normal sounding names.
Yeah. And, so at that point, Northumbria's ascendancy is sort of over a bit. There's other, like the Kingdom of Strathclyde and things. Yeah. But Wessex is really the most powerful now. Especially, I'll talk about London a bit, but it was, even though it wasn't the capital, it was sort of undisputably what they keep calling it, like the Emporium. Well, one of the greatest emporiums in Western Europe already. It's
where all the trade goods come.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest and best port that we have, closest to the continent, and it's on a major waterway.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's just geographically fortunate.
Yeah, it's sort of geographically perfect, or sort of perfect.
And it always has been,
Yeah. So. Yeah, even in the Roman times,
which is
even though they had their capital at Camalodunum or Colchester.
Yeah.
They already saw that London was just sort of strategically key. absolutely strategic and commercially as well. So it's really important who holds the London Burr, as they call it. Like the London Burr is what it's called a lot.
But you can see how the Vikings had such an easy time invading England, though, because of a lack of unity in Britain generally. Because I mean, Scotland isn't a united kingdom at this time either, although it will be soon. In fact, maybe it is actually. Scotland did unify really early, to be fair.
There are kings of Scotland, but whether their power stretches over all of the Highlands and the islands,
very questionable.
No, there'll be Highland clans and families that are sort of autonomous.
But the point is, if you look at the map of it, it's lots of patchwork kingdoms, and they didn't work together at all. And so, just one disappears basically and becomes a Danish occupied territory. And so you can see how the thing just domino styles, clonk, 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 clonk. And of course, this is good for the Danes because they go home with their treasure and say, well, we've taken this kingdom. Why don't you come over? Why not? Look at all this gold. Look at all these weak people that we've killed. Come over. This is great. This is like a brilliant boy's adventure for the Vikings. And so it encourages more and more Danes. And so eventually you get the great heathen army come over, which is, I mean, great is a subjective term. It's probably in like 5,000 men. But in Dark Ages Europe, in especially Dark Ages Britain, 5,000 men is a lot of men, especially when they're all basically professional warriors. So 5,000 professional soldiers is a scary prospect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll talk about the Great Heathen Army, because that's a specific thing, a bit towards the end of... Well, it's probably the last great set of wars Alfred has, the Great Heathen Army. Yeah, and it's actually 3 different armies. So in that particular case, it probably would have been significantly more than the number you just gave there. However,
it's hard
your
to know.
point is absolutely correct. No, absolutely.
Hard to know. But like 5,000 men is a large army capable of taking a kingdom.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was just finish up on saying that if Canute in the the mid 11th century is sort of the high watermark of Danish or Viking invasions, after he's ousted, that's the end of it though. Really, I mean, so. In 1066, people might know there's the Battle of Stamford Bridge where Harold
Hardrada,
right. So that was the last Dane Viking army to have a pitched battle with British people on our island. That's the last one. There were still scares of it all the way up until the age of Henry II, though.
Oh, I bet.
So
you don't forget, hundreds of years of pagan invasions overnight.
So that's the sweep of it. That's the bell curve of it. And right now, in Alfred's time, we're sort
of
in
the middle of it.
Yeah, right in the middle of it. Yeah, and
unenviably, frankly.
Right? Yeah, because it's a real back and forth. It's a really close run thing. Their powers, they're almost on a par. Very much so. One thing to, I suppose, mention before now is that also there's this idea of Dane Guild, that you can just pay them, pay terrorists not to hurt you. It's not a great thing, is it?
What that does is that encourages more terrorists. Literally, the Danes go home and go, where'd you get all that money? Well, they just gave it to me to go away. So if I go over there, they'll give me money to go away. It's almost like something that's happening today.
Yeah, just extortion. It doesn't even
Paying
work.
foreigners, and you get more foreigners. It's weird.
Yeah.
It's like you're incentivizing the foreigners to come by giving them money. Shouldn't give the foreigners any money.
It's like we're being exploited.
It's
as if we were being exploited in some sense.
Yeah. Just floods of men coming across the English Channel, taking our money. It's just weird. Anyway,
are we talking about the 9th century? Or...
I thought we were. Yeah. All we're saying is history. It doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so one last thing I'll mention in the generations before Alfred is there's a great King Offa. There's Offa's Dyke and all sorts of things. It's a great Viking.
Keep up Welsh.
Ivor the Boneless. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ivor the Boneless. He's one of the highlights, I think, because he represents one of the sort of high watermarks from the Viking point of view. He went around smashing everyone he came in contact with, including the Irish, the Scots, all sorts of things. So he's a really important figure, but perhaps detail for another time.
I mean, all of these names that we're giving, we could do entire episodes on, and we probably should.
I'd love to do a series on either the bonus and that whole. But
we'll talk about them another time. But anyway,
so cracking on with it, one of the big things just before Alfred himself becomes king. So he becomes king when he's quite young. I think he's about 24, something like that. Also, he's not young, but he's not old or anything. But whilst his older brother, is still king, there's a big battle in 871 at Ashdown, the Battle of Ashdown in 871. Churchill just gives us a swipe of colour. He says, quote, "The Vikings, with their brightly painted shields and banners, their finery and golden bracelets, made the West Saxons seem modest by contrast." And so it's just...
they've made a lot of money at this point.
Yeah, right, yeah. And so the Battle of Ashdown does seem to have been sort of relatively key. If the Saxons had been completely destroyed there, it might have been sort of a 1066 type situation where, that sets the tone forevermore. But you sort of just clawed it back from the... in fact, that's the line where they said that his older brother was more interested in prayer. God came first, he declared. This is Alfred's older brother.
Yeah.
God came first, he declared, to those that warned him that the battle must soon be joined. But Alfred, according to Bishop Asser, who had the account from truthful eyewitnesses, and then this is Asser, says, Seeing the heathen had come quickly onto the field and were ready for battle, they could bear the attack of the enemy no longer and had to choose between withdrawing altogether or beginning the battle without waiting for his brother, Alfred's brother. At last, like a wild boar, he led the Christian forces boldly against the army of the enemy, in spite of the fact that the king had not yet arrived. And so, relying on God's counsel and trusting to his help, God's help, he closed the shield wall in due order and thereupon moved his standards against the enemy. End quote. So that's from almost contemporaneous account there, which is great because to have contemporaneous stuff and writings of Alfred himself from the 9th century. I mean, it's sort of brilliant.
It's the best you could hope for.
Because hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years later, we've got almost nothing sometimes.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah,
there's like a couple of letters between people survive.
Yeah.
So to have the illumination, that sort of the light of history shining in the Dark Ages, right on Alfred.
Very unique.
It's brilliant.
Yeah. But you say this, this is tremendously important. And I say, like, the Vikings are pushed back, but they're not broken or destroyed. Yeah, right, which, frustrating, but good on taking the victory, basically. But, like, if it had gone the other way, well, the West Saxons could have lost thousands of men, and their kingdom could have been defenseless to yet another series of Viking conquests. So, it's all to play for here. And it's really like the last sort of, this is the last English kingdom, and this is basically your last chance to survive. So, it's all or nothing here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So you can see why Alfred's like, I think we need to think about the martial side of life for a second. But the thing is, we'll talk about the character of Alfred in a little bit, but one thing that comes across is Alfred is he's not a lover of war. This is very clearly forced upon him. He doesn't write fondly of war at all. And he writes fondly of peace, tranquility, contemplation, philosophy. He writes Christianity. He writes very fondly of all of these things. He seems to long for peace. He seems to genuinely long for peace. And so he's not like the sort of guy who enjoys war. Because we've talked about this many times. There's certain men who just really enjoy war. Yeah. Alfred isn't one of them.
For its own sake.
Yeah, exactly. For the sake of the conquest and the victory. Yeah. Alfred is not one of these guys. He's a person who's like, no, I have to do this. I have no choice. And so I guess I'm going to do it well. But when he's left to his own devices, he writes poetry. He doesn't sharpen his sword. Yeah. So it's very interesting, the kind of man that he is.
No, absolutely. There's a bit in his life towards in the second half, last third of his life, let's say, where he has sort of a lot of his plans have come to fruition and we get 14 years of peace. And that's considered an amazing achievement.
It is an amazing achievement.
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying it's not. Yeah, it's correctly considered an amazing achievement because, it's just not easily done. That represents almost a lifetime of trying to aim at that policy. And no guarantee it would ever have worked, but it does. And but people at the time and in the century since have looked at it and said, "Oh, well done."
Yeah.
Because to us, 14 years of peace doesn't seem like all that much, but they're used to a world where warfare is almost constant. Really, well.
It is
the
constant.
Danes come across a Viking every summer.
Yeah, every year, and
quite often their summer's called. Quite often their army's called the Summer Army.
Yeah, and it's not even because everyone thinks, oh, an army's coming, that must be tens of thousands of men or something. No, it can be literally a few hundred men on a few dozen boats that just turn up and sack a town, take a bunch of slaves, take whatever wealth is movable, and then leave. And so the Saxons have to spend a lot of time patrolling their own shores, just in small numbers of boats to fend off Viking attacks. So it's constant war that the Saxons are living under at this point. And honestly, it comes across like like a lot of here's some of the poem titles, right? A sorrowful fight, a fight of despair, a psalm to God, of trouble and its cure, of change, of content, of humbleness, of innocence, on fame and death. You hear the very existential topics. Alfred is not a frivolous or unserious man, and these are not unserious times. He's honestly, I've read a lot of Alfred's works at this point, and he is a man who has the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's a very sympathetic character to me, because he's just I'm just trying to be a good man, and there is a lot going on, but my faith in God will get me through this. It's basically Alfred.
Yeah, he must have had a lot of fortitude.
Oh yeah.
I think
the
type of character to stand in the face of incredible odds, not to give an inch, and not to doubt yourself hardly at all,
but to win.
Oh, well, yeah, right. Least of all to win.
Yeah.
If I could read a couple of quotes here, just around the Battle of Ashdown thing, because it's not long after that Ethelred, Alfred's older brother, dies seemingly of natural causes. Wasn't murdered or killed, fell in battle or anything. If I could just read a couple of paragraphs, if that's all right, from Churchill. He says, and this is Churchill speaking about the Battle of Ashdown, 871. The fight was long and hard. King Ethelred, his spiritual duty done, soon joined his brother. The heathens, said the bishop, that's Bishop Asa, had seized the higher ground, and the Christians had to advance uphill. There was in that place a single stunted thorn tree, which we have seen with our own eyes. Round about this tree, then, the opposing ranks met in conflict, with a great shouting from all men. One side bent on evil, the other side fighting for life and their loved ones and their native land. Asa ends there. Churchill continues. At last the Danes gave way, and, hotly pursued, fled back to Reading. They fled till nightfall. So any Americans or foreigners who don't know, Reading is a very mundane, sort of grey place.
Enriched place. Lots of Danes in Reading these days.
Right. The last thing you think of walking around Reading town centre is an early medieval battle, right?
Yeah.
That's the last thing that probably pops into your mind.
No. Yeah.
Okay. The Danes, fled till nightfall. They fled through the night of the next day, and the whole breadth of Ashdown, meaning the Berkshire Hills, was strewn with their corpses, along which were found the body of one of the Viking kings and 5 of his earls.
Good.
So it's sort of
stunning
a big
victory.
thing, but it does say, in the next paragraph, I won't bother reading it all, but it does say that the Danes were ready to fight a fortnight later. So nothing's over, but it's, quite decisive. It's like, say, I don't know, it's a bit of a crappy equivalent, but the Germans were annihilated at Stalingrad, but it doesn't mean the war's over. It doesn't mean there's no more German armies around.
Yeah.
But it does mean your back's been broken.
Yeah.
Your throat's been cut and you are going to bleed out. But it's not just done. It's not just finished.
Well, I don't even know if it'd be that serious. Like the Danes, because they can always get more, adventurers. There's bound to be another Danish army in a couple of months or something, and stuff like that. So I would view this as it's really the West Saxons with their backs against the wall, and surviving it. Right. And it's okay, it must have been morale boosting and very, lots of lessons learned for the Saxons about warfare, because at the end of the day, the Saxons had a lot, before the Viking invasions, it wasn't very violent. You know, there weren't like giant Saxon armies roaming the countryside fighting each other all the time. You get, you know, small wars between the kingdoms and stuff, but it's not like it is on the continent. You know, we've got literally tens of thousands of Franks marching around, you know, constantly. You know, it's just not the same. You know, it's actually quite peaceful in England by comparison to everywhere else. So this is one of the reasons why, like, the sort of domestic Saxons have been, like, really easily ravaged by the Danes. Like, notice the Danes didn't go for Charlemagne. You know, they leave him alone. Why? Because it's Charlemagne. He's gonna mess us up because he's got a massive professional army and we don't. You know.
Yeah, absolutely right. You said 2 or 3 things there that are absolutely spot on. The things I'm going to say next.
Yeah.
And one of them is that the 9th, well, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century Britain is seen as just something an easy pushover.
Because it is.
I was going to say a very rude line from Scarface, but it's just waiting to be screwed over. Because the mainland of Europe is much more militarized, shall we say.
You've got Moors invading from one side, Arabs invading from the other. You've got various, you know, you've probably got Hunnic invasions still going on, you know, who knows what's coming off the eastern steppes. And then in England, you've got people reading the Bible, you know, quite peaceably making honey and growing corn.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.